Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? If you're a longtime watcher of our channels and streams, then you know how much I love The Legend of Zelda. You probably also know that I'm highly critical of the franchise, the direction it's taken, and the people working on it. So while we've never really done a proper review for this channel, I figured the release of the latest big console release in the franchise is as good a place to start as any. So where to begin with such a massive title? Well, for starters, Breath of the Wild is mostly the title that does a lot of what most Zelda fans like myself have wanted for a long time. That is to expand the world and strip away linear elements. On this simple note, it succeeds wildly, haha. But if we're being truly honest with ourselves, the game isn't flawless in everything it sets out to do, but we'll get back to that. Let's talk about what really works in this game. I think the biggest praise should go to the level/world designers of this title. The Hyrule that they have created is vast, yes, but more importantly, it's beautifully designed and varied across its different landscapes. It doesn't feel like a tightly designed little garden of levels or areas as in past Zelda titles, nor is it a vast expanse of emptiness like Wind Waker. Landscape-wise, this is the best crafted open world since Red Dead Redemption, and I'm a guy who doesn't really like open world all that much. The art style also complements this game very well, not to the point that it completely hides all the graphical blemishes, of course, but it was a very good idea to adopt this look and style for its world than attempt a more gritty or realistic approach, especially given the hardware limitations of both platforms it runs on. The other major triumph of the title, besides the world design, is the interactivity of it. This applies to both an AI and what you can do and manipulate in the environment. While the series dabbled in enemy AI with past entries, here it's taken to its logical evolution in both the way enemies react and just how they go about their lives when not aware of Link's presence. Some examples of this are having a sleep schedule when night falls and kicking away bombs when thrown at them. Even a month past release, people are still finding and documenting interesting interactions, such as Stone Talus enemies fighting Guardians. Beyond enemy and NPC interaction, the game gives you all the tools or items you will need for the game in the tutorial area. This makes sense from an open-ended design standpoint, but I do feel it does leave a bit to be desired later on, especially compared to past Zelda titles. The items in this game are all part of your Sheikah iPad and can be selected through a quick pause menu. You have two types of bombs, a big fucking magnet, a time-stopping ability, and an ice block forming ability on water. These are all solid items for a Zelda game, and they will get plenty of use, which solves the problem in past Zelda entries where late game items don't really have much use outside of their home dungeon. These items combined with your glider really makes moving and interacting through the world just fun to play, even when not doing much. I feel the designers deserve special praise for going the extra mile as well. Not only can you say, burn the grass fields, doing so will create pockets of hot air that can be used to propel yourself upwards on your glider. This is just one example of many that you can use both natural elements as well as rune abilities to do all kinds of experimental interactions. The game even surprises you when you discover knocking down trees into freezing rivers to ride down on the logs is actually an intended sequence. To summarize, Nintendo succeeded wonderfully at creating a beautiful, interesting open world with an unbelievable number of things to do and ways to interact with it. So, where did the game falter otherwise? Well, sadly, most other areas tend to come up short. The first and most glaring to me is the music. Zelda is a series known for its memorable score. Hell, it even has a years-long running orchestra show that tours the world. For Breath of the Wild, however, the team went in a different direction. Leading the composition for this title is Manaka Katoaka, who's a relative newcomer to Nintendo. Her previous works include Wii Fit and some of the later Animal Crossing titles. While her charming ditties probably work just fine for those games, well, she just fucking sucks here. I get the idea behind what she was going for, but it doesn't work. Yes, this is supposed to be a more ambient reflection of a world in ruin, or rather, on the brink of ruin and people living an almost nomadic lifestyle, and the whole theme of the game is being out in the open air and blah blah blah. This would be fine if even where there is music it was really good, and it's mostly just simple tappings on a piano here. Some of the enemy encounter music is straight up terrible, either sounding like rejected Peanuts tracks or Baby's first auto-tune. Some of the village tracks are good, and Hyrule Castle area does sound great, but they serve as a frustrating reminders of what could and should have been rather than standout tracks in a game full of memorable music. The other noticeable issue that I and plenty others have shared is the weapon durability system. It's pretty notorious now that the weapons are made of hollow plastic in Hyrule, and even the strongest, toughest looking weapons can and will break after a few uses. The defense force for the game claims that it forces you to be more creative with enemy encounters, such as using runes and the environment around you. I find this mostly just an excuse, as you don't always have a metal box to swing around or a cliff to blow people off. If the designers were so concerned about people not using other weapons, they should have spent the many years of development making weapons interesting to use. As it stands now, weapons fall into 3 basic types: one-handed, two-handed, and a spear type. The issue is that the attack animation and such is the same for each type. Had the weapons and combat system been given more thought, people could have had more desire to use and acquire weapons to see how they handle, rather than just being more disposable tissue. Another big piece of bullshit in the weapon durability is that no one seems to bring up is that enemies don't have to follow the same rules as Link. When an enemy is holding a weapon, it will never break, their shields will never shatter, and they will have unlimited arrows. Furthermore, even if an enemy is disarmed, they will still punch and kick at you, and when Link is disarmed, he has no combat abilities whatsoever. It's just bizarre and frustrating, and certainly brings the quality of the game down a notch. While being disarmed is pretty rare, and you can always chuck bombs, the reality is that the combat in the game is frankly lacking. A lot of praise has been given to the game's difficulty, and while it is nice, it is also kind of a bullshit difficulty. Basically, enemies hit harder, there's a stat system to your armor now, and hearts no longer exist. This is all fine really, but it's also strange to see Link's combat abilities reduced from past games. Breath of the Wild strips Link's combat and movement back to Ocarina of Time levels, maybe even less in fact, as there is no rolling ability. You do have a Witch Time-like option if you backflip right before a hit, but this serves mainly to drain your weapon's durability faster. It's not as if you really need Twilight Princess's combat moves when you have bows and bombs and time freezing available to you, but it certainly would have made engaging with enemies a lot more fun if it did have them. There are some other minor faults with the game as well. They certainly don't hamper the experience, but they are noticeable. The wildlife that populates Hyrule is somewhat small. You will be seeing a lot of the same foxes, wolves, cranes, deer, and boars throughout the world. There are a couple of unique animals such as ostriches and rhinos, but for the most part this is an area where Red Dead Redemption excelled and Zelda feels a bit copy-paste. Also, the enemies are a bit copy-paste as well. You will be fighting a whole lot of bokoblins, moblins, and lizardfolks throughout the game, and the occasional skeletal form at night. It's not too bad as the encounters are generally fun, but there does seem to be less enemy variety in this game for such a giant new world. That being said, there are some rarer enemy fights that are pretty awesome, such as Lionel's, and the Yiga clan is an interesting new element. Lastly, I should probably mention the story and presentation in the game, seeing as it is the first Zelda game with voice acting. The voiceover work is passable mostly, the worst being Zelda herself, who sadly takes up the most speaking cutscenes. Part of the problem is the script, what little there is. Breath of the Wild does feel like a reboot or a remake of Zelda 1 in more ways than one, and part of that is the story itself. Taking place over 10,000 years past whatever timeline they end up deciding it takes place in, the plot is as bare bones as it fucking gets. The central conflict is a fart cloud with no speaking lines that appeared underneath Hyrule Castle 100 years prior to the game taking place. You died fighting it and were placed in the Shrine of Resurrection to awaken now and save Zelda, who's been trapped in the waft of purple E. coli ever since. They try to expand a bit by having the story of discovery of the 4 big mecha beasts that 4 champions tried to pilot to help extinguish the fart, but failed as well and become the game's only resemblance of dungeons. Even upon completing the game and getting the extra ending, there's extremely little going on in this title. This is probably for the better, as the director's last title tried way too hard to make a plot-heavy Zelda title, and really just shit the bed through the mattress and all over the floor around it with Skyward Sword. Basically, as a longtime Zelda fan, I find it non-offensive but also basic as fuck. I am happy to see the long-awaited return of the Gerudo tribe, as the Zelda team's hard-on for Gorons and Zoras was getting a little old, but don't worry, they're still here. Speaking of mecha animals and dungeons, the biggest disappointment as a Zelda fan here is the lack of them. Now, this is a hard area to gauge as a negative or positive, as this is really more of a preference thing. But this is a Zelda game without any real dungeons. You have 120 shrines scattered across the world that all have the same look and graphics, and 4 divine beasts that are basically a big brown shrine, but nothing close to an actual dungeon. On the one hand, this does free up the development team to come up with some clever one-room puzzles without the strain of fitting it into a full-themed dungeon. But most of them are pretty easy, and worse are the monotonous combat trial shrines, where you fight the same single enemy type in each and every one. The only real negative about the lack of dungeons is that it does take away the feeling of progression in past Zelda titles. While nice that you can tackle any beast in any order you want, the lack of theming, finding a new useful item, and the fact that they're so small leaves you with a bit unsatisfied feeling when completing them. This also falls into a larger problem with the game, and that is the somewhat lack of reward. Each shrine gives you a spirit orb, of which you need 4 to increase hearts or stamina. They're everywhere. To increase your armor stats, you need minerals and enemy parts, which is actually a really good solution to making you want to fight and hunt certain things. But if you generally kill and mine everything you come across, it won't really be much of a problem. The reality is that you don't really need to see a whole lot of the game world because there's not exactly a whole lot you get out of it. The variety of clothing types is nice, but also very limited compared to other games in this genre. Also, since all clothing follows the exact same stats, starting at 3 and going to 5, 8, and 12, there's really nothing necessary about finding them unless it's for a specific use like dulling heat or cold. What I'm getting at here is that Breath of the Wild takes some good baby steps in going into a larger world of weapon and armor variety, but they're just that, baby steps. I'm glad it's making them, but let's not get ahead of ourselves and think it's done well or is that revolutionary. What is exceptional is the design and interactivity of this game's world. While it may sound like I have a lot of problems with the game, they are mostly minor. And while I feel if I was rating this more critically, I should think less of it, but the truth is, even with its problems, it's just a lot of damn fun to play. I love the world and atmosphere, and I love discovering what I can do in the world. Personally, I would rate this game a 9 because of the simple fun factor, when in reality it's probably closer to an 8. Is it the best Zelda game ever? No, not close really. But in the overall pantheon of Zelda titles, I'd place it probably 6th, maybe 5th. A great game that's worth buying, but let's not overlook its faults either. Thanks for listening, and let me know if you want to see more of these in the future. Later, dudes!